guys, we're picking up with the empathetic communication. This is another kind of short one, but we got a couple points that we're going to go over here that build off of the last lecture on communication. So when we talk about empathetic communication, empathetic listening, this goes back to, if you're familiar with Stephen Covey or you've read any of his works, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, this comes from the habit that you have to first go out and seek first to understand and then be understood. And this is the most important part of communication, is the listening. This is so true, that you need to go out and be open-minded, really listen to what people are saying. Because if you think about it, where do we get our views from? We get them from preconceived notions, from perceptions, and oftentimes, our perceptions, our preconceived notions are incorrect, and we're wrong most of the time. If you think about, sometimes if you're listening to somebody, you're already formulating in your mind what you're going to say to them before they're even finished. And this is not really, active listening. If you're giving your attention to how you're going to respond before you get all the facts and get all the information, we're not really listening to the person if we're already formulating in our mind how we're going to respond before we have all the information. So it's all about trust. It's all about building that level of trust with your coworkers, your peers, your employees that work for you, and your higher-ups. So if you want to be an effective listener, and I'm sure, a lot of you might think, well, that's not me, I'm not going to be able to do that. You can, and it's just all about changing your perception and thinking differently. So you have to desire to really improve your skills, and you have to change if you want to improve, which oftentimes can be harder than what it sounds like. Change is never easy, but if we can communicate, get the information out there, change is always easier when we understand the why behind it. And here, we're wanting to change to be a more effective listener. Particularly in healthcare and as a public health professional, having and cultivating these listening skills, being able to be an empathetic listener and practice active listening and really hone in on these skills is going to be extremely important, just because of the nature of our business, right? So we, like we talked about in communication, we talk about some very, very difficult things in healthcare. We're dealing oftentimes with life and death decisions, communicating that information out, very touchy information when we're talking about reimbursement, when we're talking about, patients' conditions with their families, things of that nature. So it makes communication in healthcare a little more difficult than probably other industries, just because of the nature of our work. So before you move on, I want you, if you can, to just kind of pause the video after this slide and really give this slide some thought and think about your own personal communication techniques and how you communicate with others. And think about, how your percentages might break down. So, how much of your communication comes from nonverbal and body language? How much comes from how you say stuff? And then how much comes from the words that you use? How would your percentages look if you had to spread them out between these three things? So we go forward, I find this really interesting, and I hope that others do too, because generally we would think it's the words we use that can create some barriers to communication or kind of hinder our effectiveness of our communication, but it's actually not the words we use. It's more so our body language, our nonverbal cues that we're giving out. I mean, look at it right there at 55%. And then behind that is how we say the things we're saying at, almost 40%. We think it's the words, but it's really the body language. if I were to come up to you and say, hey, Joe, you're doing a great job, keep it up. I see great things for you in the future. If I come up and say that to you as an employee, you're going to take that very positively. You're going to think, yeah, I'm doing a really great job. Just keep doing what I'm doing. Now, if I come up to you again and say, hey, Joe, you're doing a really great job here, and just keep it up, and you know, I see good things. Just keep up doing what you're doing. I'm saying the same words essentially, but you're receiving it in two different ways. So you might think, with that second one, man, am I doing something wrong? She didn't sound too confident. What do I need to do to change? You're not building that level of trust and not building that level of confidence to keep your employees motivating you and trusting you. So remember, communication is all about this trust building relationship that we need to build with our employees to continue to create this harmonious culture and environment that we want to survive and thrive in. So just remembering, during that example too, you can't see my body language if I'm rubbing my hands together, not really looking at you, looking down, looking up, not really paying attention. These are all nonverbals that kind of would indicate to you that something is wrong, that you're not doing something right. So just being very cognizant of not only what you're saying, but how you're saying it. How is it coming across? And what are those nonverbal cues that you may be giving to the recipient that they may be receiving differently than how you intend? So these levels of listening kind of go in successive order, right? So we had ignoring, which is the worst, obviously, and it goes all the way up to empathetic listening, which is the best type of listening that we want to try and practice. Hopefully a lot of us try to practice attentive listening, but if we can get to empathetic listening, that should be our goal. Empathetic listening overall is not only just listening with your ears to the words that are being said, but having some level of empathy there. What are your eyes saying? What's your heart saying to the person who you're listening to? We're using our eyes and our heart and our ears, our body language to really hear the entire message. Because again, remember, only 7% are the words that we're saying. So what are those other cues that we're giving off, and are we practicing empathetic listening, if we're, messing with our hands, or if we've got our arms crossed, if we're closed off to the person we're talking to. So we really just need to be cognizant of the way that we're saying things and the body language we're using. And this is really the way great leaders lead. Some of the best people that I've worked under really have honed in on this skill because again, it's about building that level of trust. If you can get really good at empathetic listening and really build on this skill, you can build that level of trust for your employees. And leaders, very successful leaders who have really worked on this skill, they have employees that would, do anything for them. They would walk on water for them. And they have that charismatic appeal to them because of this empathetic listening aspect. So we introduced mirroring techniques on the last slide, and I want to cover that a little bit more in depth. But mirroring techniques are just, basically techniques used during communication to really establish understanding and making sure that you're hearing the message correctly when you're listening. Because when people say things to you, go back to the body language, go back to the how we are saying things and not just the words. You may interpret what somebody's saying differently than how they mean it. So by using mirroring techniques, you're able to go back and say, if I'm understanding you correctly, this is how I'm understanding what you're telling me, and kind of repeat back in your own words how you understood the issue or the problem that's been brought to you. And mirroring techniques, may seem like they take a lot of time on the front end, but I can almost guarantee you it is going to be much more helpful to do this on the front end than try to clean up a mess on the back end because of lack of communication. 90% of the issues that we see can almost always be traced back to a lack or a breakdown in communication because we either didn't communicate correctly or we didn't make sure that we understood the message that we were receiving it the way it was intended. Now, there are some times, when you don't want to use mirroring techniques, especially around touchy subjects. So just, know when to not use mirroring techniques, but it can help you overall in making sure that you're understanding the message correctly so that you can troubleshoot it right then and there. So we introduced this particular lecture with Stephen Covey from his 7 Rules for Highly Effective People. And Stephen Covey makes this assertion, and I completely agree with this, that there is a relationship bank account that exists between you and everyone else around you. Again, going back to that level of trust, to make a deposit, if you will, into this bank account, you do things like empathetic listening, you do things like active and attentive listening. So you want to build up that bank account, you want to build up that trust. Now, withdrawals, unfortunately, these are made. Everybody does it. It's just learning to recognize when it's happening and seeing how you can stop it or troubleshoot it. But withdrawals come from things like having unkind language, body language, if you don't say something the correct way, ignoring, being snippy or snappy at somebody. And unfortunately, those withdrawals from the bank come with interest, if you will. So, think about a time when, somebody said something to you and you either took it the wrong way or, they were a little bit snippy or kind of ignoring you or really unkind. Wasn't it harder for you to build that level of trust back with them? So that withdrawal that they took out of your relationship bank account really came with a lot of interest, and it's harder. You have to make more deposits into the bank to make up for the withdrawals that you're taking out. So we'll end here with a short video on active listening. Now you can play it here from the slide deck or you can click the link out. But please make sure to watch this on active listening and we'll pick up next time.